Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're plunging into a stack of source material focused on the Arab Revolt during World War I. We're drawing pretty heavily from the incredible detail in 7 Pillars of Wisdom.
Yeah, it's a fascinating account.
Our mission to really pull out the most vital insight, maybe some surprising facts from these pages, and give you a direct route to understanding this complex period.
The people, the unique kind of warfare, it's all in there.
Exactly. We'll explore who the Arabs were, at least according to this text, what sparked the revolt against the Turks, the key leaders, quite a mix of personalities, and just the day-to-day grind of campaign life.
And the strategies, right, which were pretty unconventional, plus the tricky stuff behind the scenes, politics, personal conflicts.
Definitely. Get ready for some eye-opening moments and hopefully just enough context to make it all stick. Let's unpack this.
Absolutely. Let's jump right in. The source starts with a really interesting point, actually. It mentions a first difficulty in even defining who the Arabs were back then.
A difficulty. How so?
Well, it uses this striking phrase, a manufactured people, suggesting their identity, their name's meaning, was actually shifting at the time.
Manufactured. That's a strong word. It implies identity wasn't fixed. Maybe it was being debated or even forged.
Something like that. So the source asks, what was the crucial marker? The test.
And what was it?
According to this text, it boiled down to the Arabic language. That was the common tongue across Syria, Palestine, Mesopotamia, the whole Arabian Peninsula.
Okay, so language is the key link.
Yeah, though the source is careful to say these areas had diverse people speaking related tongues. Assyrian, Babylonian, Hebrew, Aramaic, Syriac, and so on.
Right.
It even uses the term Semitic, but then immediately says that's incorrectly used scientifically. But it stresses they saw themselves as cousins, aware of this relationship.
Interesting. So language connects these diverse cousins. What about appearances or customs? Was there uniformity there?
The source says no, not really. Appearance and customs varied a lot, but it insists there was an underlying equal and essential likeness. And then it draws this really sharp contrast, which seems fundamental. The divide between the desert people and the hill or settled people.
The Bedouin versus the townsfolk. Classic distinction. How did the desert itself shape things, according to the source?
Fundamentally, desert life, it argues, was all about the camel. It dictated everything, supply lines, where tribes could breed animals on these upland pastures. It shaped tribal areas, movement, everything.
So logistics were paramount.
Completely. Even camel markets determined population levels and living standards. And when areas got overcrowded,
They moved.
tribes moved north, following specific routes like Wadi Rum or through Jebel Shammar towards Syria or Mesopotamia. Some became riverine Arabs, others climbed the western oases ladder.
So the environment is this massive driver of migration and settlement. Fascinating. The text also gets into their character, doesn't it? Some vivid descriptions there.
Oh, yeah. It calls them a people of spasms, of upheavals, of ideas, a race of individual genius inherently.
Spasms and upheavals sounds volatile.
Well, the source contrasts these intense bursts of activity or conviction with periods of quietude. It suggests their beliefs were driven by instinct, actions were intuitive.
Right.
And here's a key claim from the source. Their largest manufacturer was of creeds, almost like monopolists of revealed religions, Christianity, Islam, the ones that spread globally.
And failed creeds.
Those, it says, were kept quiet, scattered on the fringes of the deserts like broken faiths.
That focus on ideas is really strong.
Yeah.
The source says they could be swung by an idea as on a cord.
Yes, and this idea of unpledged allegiance is framed as, well, a double-edged sword. It made them obedient. Until success brought responsibility. Then, the source argues, the idea was gone and the work ended in ruins.
Wow.
It contrasts this with trying to lead them with wealth. They'd apparently drop riches in a heartbeat for a prophet with a compelling idea. The text calls them incorrigibly children of the idea, feckless and colorblind. A real disconnect between body and spirit, it suggests.
And that amazing line, unstable as water and like water, would perhaps finally prevail.
So memorable, isn't it? The source uses that metaphor, seeing them dashing themselves against the coast of flesh, wearing down the material world, the granite with the sheer force of these ideals.
And the revolt itself
Was one such wave, raised and rolled before the breath of an idea it crested, and then toppled over and fell at Damascus.
Okay, so we have this picture of the people, the power of ideas.
Yeah.
What actually lit the fuse for this revolt? against the Ottoman Turks.
The source points fingers squarely at the Young Turks. Initially, after their success, they talked about Ottoman Brotherhood.
Right, that inclusive idea.
But then, the source says, the forces they unleashed kind of terrified them. The ideal just evaporated, and the cry became, Turkey made Turkish for the Turks. Yeni Turan, they called it.
A clear pivot to ethnic nationalism.
Exactly. And this new policy wasn't just about Turks abroad, their irredenti. First, it meant purging the empire of subject races who resisted the Turkish stamp.
And the Arabs were the biggest group, so.
They were targeted first, according to the source. Arab deputies scattered, societies banned, notables proscribed. Enver Pasha, it claims, was even harsher in suppressing Arabic language and culture than the old Sultan, Abdul Hamid.
Speaking of Abdul Hamid, the source mentions his earlier approach to the Sharif of Mecca, who becomes so central later.
Yeah, Abdul Hamid had tried to assert more control in Mecca. Sometimes he'd depose a sharif, maybe appoint someone from a rival family just to stir up trouble.
Divide and rule.
Pretty much. And he also brought some of the Sharifian family to Constantinople, kind of an honorable captivity. The future leader, Hussein ibn Ali, was held there for nearly 18 years.
Which, maybe counterintuitively, turned out to be useful.
The source suggests exactly that. Hussein apparently used the time well, assuring his sons Ali, Abdullah, Faisal, Zaid got a modern education and experience, the kind of experience that would let them lead armies later.
Huh. So Hussein's sons get educated, the Young Turks turn nationalist, then World War I erupts. How did the war hit Hussein specifically in the Shi'ite?
It was a huge crisis for him. The pilgrimage, the Hajj, stopped. Massive loss of revenue.
Right, the economy.
Plus, he feared the Indian food ships stopping since technically he was an enemy subject now. And the Hejaz produced almost no food. It was completely dependent on the Turks controlling supplies via the Hejaz Railway.
So he was incredibly vulnerable.
More exposed than ever before, the source says. And at the same time, the Turks desperately needed him.
For their war effort.
For their declaration of jihad, the holy war against the Christian powers. They needed the Sharif of Mecca's blessing for legitimacy.
A difficult position for Hussein.
Very. But then Faisal, one of his sons, went to Medina and found it packed with Turkish troops under Fakhri Pasha.
Ah, him. The source has a memorable description.
It calls him the courageous old butcher who had bloodily purified Zaytun and Urfa of Armenians. Chilling.
Definitely.
Seeing that heavy Turkish presence, Faisal realized, okay, a surprise attack is impossible. So according to the source, he showed his hand. He raised the Arab flag.
Declaring open revolt.
And the source argues that act effectively ended Abdul Hamid's old pan-Islamic dream and also Germany's hopes of using Islam for the Kaiser's global ambitions. Those became dreams, it says. The Sharif's rebellion closed that chapter.
So the stage is set. An idea-driven people, pushed by Turkish nationalism, pulled by the Sharif's declaration. Who are the actual leaders making this happen? The source gives some amazing portraits.
It really does. You've got Sharif Hussein himself, the father, described as outwardly gentle, maybe seeming weak, but hiding this crafty policy, deep ambition, and a kind of un-Arabian foresight, strength, and obstinacy.
And the tribes.
Loved him openly, apparently, called him Sayyidina, our Lord. His descent from the Prophet gave him huge moral authority.
And Faisal, the main commander in the field.
Faisal also loved openly, seen as heroic. We see him reacting, adapting, telegraphing new strategies when the Medina attack plan failed. The source shows his camp life, simple tent, audiences, but also his dependence on British support for his shaken men.
What kind of support?
A base at Yenbo, stores, supplies, crucial officer volunteers, POWs actually, from Mesopotamia and the Canal Zone, plus gun crews, British advisors. It was all about linking his irregulars to the bigger war effort.
What about Abdullah, another son?
The source mentions a British visit to him, discussions about money, titles, the war. But the text's judgment is pretty blunt. Abdullah was not the necessary leader. His personality comes through in how he apparently explained the revolt, starting with this long roundabout story about some Turkish official.
Interesting. Then there's Auda Abu Tai, the legendary Houtet chief. The source makes him sound epic.
Auda is just incredible in the text, embodies desperate courage, fierce tribal pride, a hugely experienced raider hitting targets from Aleppo to Basra. This made him enemies, sure, but gave him proper scope.
Scope for what? Rating.
Yeah, but the source captures his complexity. Hard-headed as he was hot-headed, there was a cold factor of possibility even in his wildest plans. Immense patience in action, but could turn into a wild beast if angered. Couldn't be ordered around, apparently, but loved to jest upon himself.
What a mix, a mythic figure almost.
Hmm.
Any other key players highlighted?
Yeah, quite a few brief but vivid sketches. There's Sharaf, who held Yenbo for Faisal. Powerful, capable, but the source says he had no ambition, just acted from duty. Feared for being severe and impartial, had a sinister face from an old injury, yet a pleasant smile. Great detail there.
Mouth soft, eyes terrible, the text says.
Exactly. Then Nasir, called our best guerrilla general, even though he was apparently a reluctant warrior, more a man of gardens, found a comfy cave, recognizing the need to keep up activity.
Practical guerrilla leader.
And quick mentions of others: Ali ibn al-Hussein, not the Sharif's son, but a fierce Atiba leader called a devil by one old man, Nesib el-Bekri, the politic Damascene, crucial for bridging the gap with the villagers. Sultan el-Abud, the Atiba chief, harebrained but brave, always joking.
Yeah.
Whole cast of characters.
It really is a tapestry. So let's get into the experience. What was it actually like being part of this campaign? Forget the grand strategy for a second, the daily reality, the human cost.
The source is absolutely unflinching on this. It talks about an everlasting battle that just stripped away the value of life. They lived with ropes about our necks, literally a price on their heads, the constant fear of hideous torture.
Constant threat.
Every day, some died. The living felt like sentient puppets. The taskmaster, war itself, was merciless. The weak envied the dead. Success felt distant. Failure seemed like a welcome release from toil. It was all stretch or sag of nerves. Impotence against the big picture felt bitter. Physical sensation itself became meanly transient.
That sounds utterly draining, psychologically devastating.
Totally. The text describes these gusts of cruelty, perversions, lusts, running lightly over the surface without troubling us, almost like the extreme stress dulled their moral compass.
Numbness.
Exactly. They learned there were pangs too sharp, griefs too deep, ecstasies too high for our finite selves to register. It paints this picture of psychological overload leading to a kind of shutdown.
And beyond the psychological, the day-to-day physical stuff.
Oh, it was brutal. Bruised feet staggering along. The intense camel fighting, men literally running beside their camels to leap into the saddle. Forced marches, triple speed sometimes. Camp life around coffee hearths, using camel saddles as elbow rests.
Resourceful.
Yeah. Arabs describe relaxing onto stony ground like lizards. Despite the hardship, the source notes their physical perfection. But daily life meant constant hospitality duties, finding water, enduring extreme weather, wind, dust, heat, rain, cold, mud, lice, camel ticks, constant companions, hunting gazelles for food, specific eating customs, right hand only, silent spitting and belching apparently part of it, sleeping on saddle covers. And constant pain, fever, dysentery. Wounds are described graphically: gunshot, bayonets, even biting necks in fights, splintered bones. They bandaged wounds, sometimes using urine as an antiseptic, the source says. Severely wounded men often became sleepy.
Just a grim, grinding existence.
Yeah.
How did the leaders even manage these fiercely individualistic tribal fighters?
Well, the source says success wasn't level throughout. The Sharifs, like Hussein and Faisal, had authority mainly because of their revered descent from the Prophet.
That carried weight.
Huge weight. Tribes followed the smoke of their racial fanaticism. But towns often sighed for the stability of Ottoman rule. The tribes felt they had made this free Arab government, and each of them was it, fiercely independent.
Which sounds like chaos waiting to happen.
Big risk of anarchy. Strong family ties helped. Kin responsibility was vital, but that very strength, the source argues, negated central power.
So the traditional structures actually worked against building a unified state.
Exactly. The source characterizes the Semites' idea of nationality as just independence for clans and villages. Ideal union only happened maybe episodically to resist an outsider. Constructive policies, an organized state, an extended empire, the source says, were hateful in it. They were fighting to get rid of an empire, not build one.
That must have had massive implications for military support and strategy.
Fundamentally, imagine the Sharif's task: feeding and paying fighters and their families. 2 pounds a month per man, 4 per camel. The source calls keeping a tribal army going for 5 months a miracle.
How did they afford it?
British gold helped, but the source notes an interesting difference. Turks might offer bribes for little actual service, but Faisal, using payment, actually got service. And British support was absolutely critical. That Yenbo base, supplies, the officer volunteers, gun crews from internment camps, mountain guns, machine guns, plus the professional British officers as advisors and liaisons.
Though not always smooth sailing.
No, the source admits to vices of amateur control, experimental councils, divisions, whimsicality in the British effort early on. But the need for that liaison was urgent.
Okay, let's talk strategy. The source makes a really specific, maybe counterintuitive point about what they targeted.
This is a key insight, yeah. The source states plainly, destroying Turkish materials, railways, bridges, engines, guns, anything using high explosive was more profitable than killing individual Turkish soldiers.
More profitable. Why? That goes against typical military thinking, doesn't it?
Completely. Because, the source explains, they couldn't afford casualties like a regular army. Irregulars were individuals. An individual death might make but a brief hole, yet rings of sorrow widened out therefrom.
The ripple effect on the tribe.
Exactly. Regular armies see soldiers almost as components in a system, replaceable. The Arab War, as the source portrays it, had to be simpler, more individual. Efficiency was personal efficiency. It was the sum of single efforts versus the product of a compound system.
So it's about disruption, not attrition. Hitting the enemy's ability to function.
Precisely. And the source notes Allenby, the new British commander, got this, much better than his predecessor, Murray, who was apparently shocked to find more Turks tied down fighting Arabs than facing his main force.
So Allenby supported this.
Allenby's regal gift, the source calls it, was giving them unlimited mobility, attack when and where they liked. And the text constantly stresses using local men they knew the ground, fought best defending home turf. A shift from static defense to fluid movement.
How did this play out in tactics on the ground?
Well, camel fighting was core, constant raiding. Demolitions were huge. Trying automatic mines, which failed. Using dynamite, apparently Otto's particular pleasure, and getting good with gelatin mines. Using drainage holes in bridges to bring down arches, shatter walls, ruin rails, even just turning over rail sections.
Simple but effective. And the Fighting Deluxe, what was that?
That refers to using the Rolls-Royce armored cars. Especially effective on flat, dry mud pans. Reaching speeds up to 65 mph, providing cover for demolition teams. The source even mentions them taking photos of the explosions, happy bursts, it calls them. A strange juxtaposition.
Definitely. What else was in their arsenal?
Machine guns Vickers with long sights, 20 positioned on a flint bank is one image. Mountain guns, Lewis guns, trench mortars, and close-in stuff. Bayonets, daggers, rifles.
And prisoners. How were they handled?
A stark contrast is drawn. The source says Turks often cut prisoners' throats. Faisal, however, offered a reward a pound a head so many were brought in unharmed. They also engaged in parleys for surrender. Night ops were tricky, especially in moonlight. One bizarre tactic mentioned is using news of plague at Shat to gain entry to a post.
Wow. What about discipline and motivation within this highly individualistic force?
As we said, the Sharif's lineage was key for loyalty. While tribal independence meant orders weren't always followed to the letter, the source says a mild routine was achieved in camp and on the march. They saluted the Sharif. Guns were kept decently.
What motivated them beyond loyalty?
They expected big rewards or punishments and boasted about pains and gains. The source suggests their very unreason made them apt for any effort, any risk. Only one bodyguard resignation is mentioned. The younger men, described as full of carnal passion, well-fed, exercised, rich, seemed drawn to the risk, fascinated by suffering, feeling servitude, richer in experience than authority.
Interesting psychology. How did the source describe their view of outsiders, especially the British involved?
It says Arabs respected force little, craft more, but respected blunt sincerity most of all, which the source wryly notes was nearly the sole weapon God had excluded from his armament.
Ouch.
Yeah. Individually, they might prefer specific Englishmen to Turks or others, but the source warns against seeing this as broadly pro-English. Each foreigner had to make his own poor bed among them.
Okay, let's track some key events. Taking Wejh early on, what was the impact?
Big impact, according to the source. It forced the Turks to abandon their advance towards Mecca and switch to just passively defending Medina and the railway.
Which freed up the Arabs to focus on the railway.
Exactly. Attacking the railway became the main strategy. Experts made plans, Germans saw the danger, Enver ordered Medina evacuated, the narrator realized practical experience trumped theory, and the Turks were effectively pinned down in defensive positions.
The capture of Akaba feels like a really major turning point.
Huge. It was the second objective, meant to cut off Turkish traffic on the Dead Sea. And the source notes it was taken a fortnight earlier than promised to Allenby.
How did they do it?
A raid on a Turkish post right on the coast. Used motor launch and lighters, caught the garrison sleeping, burned huts, looted stores, scuttled boats, no Arab casualties, 60 prisoners. A quick, decisive action.
And supporting Akaba required infrastructure.
Yes, that motor road. A massive effort by Gilman, Dowsett, their crews, and Egyptian soldiers. Months spent carving a road through the Wadi Im Gorge to Guwera. The source calls it a great work.
The Battle of Tafila sounds odd, the way the source describes the Turkish side.
Yeah, the source calls the Turkish attempt to retake Tafila rankest folly. Why waste men on a place the Arabs didn't even particularly value, just wanted to pass through? The attack failed, marked by lunatic tactics, the source says. The Arab defense held. It was also a big first fight for young Meda'ab.
The railway demolitions, lots of specific examples in the source.
Definitely highlights the focus on material destruction. Aba el Num, a half-failed automatic mine. Mudawara, a successful train wreck. A mine took out a bridge arch, wrecked the locomotive, killed 20 Turks, captured officers and crucial food supplies, and, importantly, no men killed or wounded on the Arab side.
That reinforces the strategy.
Absolutely. Another story, the Beni Atiyah tribe asking for a demolitions expert, Allurans, and getting sawed. He captured a train carrying 20,000 pounds in gold, but only kept the detonator wire as his trophy. Other attempts were less successful, wet weather, no trains showing up.
What about Abd al-Lisan? That sounded critical.
Imperative battle, the source calls it. Needed to secure the pass into Akaba, had to dislodge a Turkish battalion. Auda's famous charge broke the Turkish infantry here. The Turks offered to surrender, but the source notes the dilemma: Arabs couldn't hold their men together indefinitely for a delayed surrender, risking a massacre. Night ops were too risky.
Later on, taking Mudawara station itself.
That was Buxton's force, attacking before dawn with bombers. Station Southern Redoubt fell easily. Middle Redoubt surrendered soon after. Semna was also taken easily, even with Maulud Pasha wounded directing its defense. Other small posts fell quickly to Hawk Post, where machine guns scared the Turks off. South Post was messier, involving Huzzah's dramatic camel charge over the trenches.
The momentum seems to build towards Damascus.
Definitely. The Dara raid becomes a major focus, an objective set by Allenby himself. Cut the crucial railway communications behind the Turkish lines. This needed 2,000 new camels.
Why Dara specifically?
Allenby's bigger vision, fulfilling Smut's plan, was to push to Damascus and Aleppo. Putting pressure behind Dara would cripple the Turks west of Damascus, and Damascus itself was seen as the key to its fall would mean the end of the war in the east, maybe influencing the wider war. Strategic, tactical, political, moral reasons to push on. Reconnaissance showed Dara was active aerodrome, troops, trains. Cutting the line behind Shihab was partly tactical, partly symbolic revenge for a lost bridge.
And then finally entering Damascus.
The source describes an incredible scene. Miles of people greeting, thousands cheering. The city went mad with joy. Men tossing burning tar bushes, women tearing their veils in celebration, people throwing flowers, carpets from windows, wives leaning out, laughing, splashing perfume. They took the Turkish HQ, sorted the living from dead, and appointed Shukri as acting governor, showing native government in power.
And the Turkish Fourth Army, their main opponent.
A final encounter near Kiswe. Ada fought his last battle, killing, plundering, capturing survivors till dawn. They passed the remains of the Fourth Army, simply calling it our stumbling block for 2 years. Gone.
An incredible climax.
Yeah.
But this whole campaign, as dramatic as it was, faced huge challenges, right? Both internal and external.
Oh, absolutely. Internally, that core tension never went away. Tribal independence versus the need for central control. Those strong family ties were great locally, but the source insists they negated central power. The whole Semitic idea of nationality, it argues, was clan-based.
And conflicts within the ranks.
Yes. Feuds like the Agel versus Atban. The Sharif's influence depended on their descent. Fanaticism helped, but tensions with townsfolk persisted. Finding reliable local men was ongoing.
And friction with allies, like the British.
The source mentions practical issues, regulars versus irregulars, problems like the Bisha Masons taking it easy. But the really deep, corrosive challenge was the political deception.
Right, the McMahon promises versus the secret Sykes-Picot agreement.
This is absolutely central to the narrator's experience in the source. The revolt, it states baldly, began on false pretenses. McMahon offered support for Arab governments, but with that clause about saving the interests of our ally France.
The hidden poison pill.
Exactly. It concealed the secret treaty where Britain, France, and Russia had already carved up the promised lands into annexed territories or spheres of influence, and this was kept secret from McMahon himself, and crucially, from Sharif Hussein.
And the source's narrator knew.
Yes, and felt deeply compromised. The narrator admits assuring the Arabs that England kept its word in letter and spirit. while knowing about the treaty. It felt like a rankling fraudulence, a constant mind's habit. It meant daily posturing in alien dress, preaching in alien speech, knowing the promises were only worth what Arab military strength could enforce later.
A terrible internal conflict.
The narrator tried to rationalize it, the source says, by fighting the war purely and cheaply, focusing on material destruction. But that justification crumbled after tough experiences like Hesa. When old Nuri Shalan confronted them with contradictory British pledges, asking which one to believe, the narrator felt forced into being the chief confidence man, advising trust in the latest in-date of the contradictions. Agony of mind, the source calls it.
That must have colored everything.
Profoundly. The source reveals this deep personal struggle. The narrator didn't even want the role, preferred maps or intelligence work, felt disgust at amateur control, blamed the Arabs for failures, but saw that as masking their own errors.
And that connects to the strategy focus. Destroying things, not people.
It seems linked. The source contrasts it with regular military science, the sacrifice of capacity, managing the human factor. Preferring material targets came from not being able to afford individual casualties among irregulars. The narrator felt their brain was sick of unsupported thinking, needed dragging to work, suffered illness.
There's also that profound discomfort with physicality mentioned in the source.
A really deep-seated thing, finding it degrading to acknowledge bodies, seeing focus on the physical as glorifying man's cross, disliking them myself they could see and hear. It led to seeking mental death, feeling life and honor were separate. Honor was lost, they felt, when they gave those false assurances.
It all ties back to the idea-driven nature of the revolt, doesn't it?
The source frames it exactly that way. The narrator felt they'd pushed the Arabs on tiptoe to reach our creed, linking British ideals to concrete actions, giving a finite goal. But for the narrator, the real goal was abstract, an unending effort towards unattainable imagined light. They felt alone in this, seeing the crowd seeking tangible results like pathetic dogs snuffling around a lamppost, became tired to death of these Arabs, petty incarnate Semites, feeling everyone sharpened on each other's faults.
So, amidst all this brutality, strategy, personal torment, the source also captures moments of real beauty and keen observation.
It really does. The landscape descriptions are often stunning, almost poetic. Wadi beds grained like Morocco leather, glistening salt crystals, saffron plants turning views gold, stark lava fields, cone craters, the beautifully put Majaber graves, wind and tamarisk trees sounding like English trees, and rum. Unforgettable descriptions of pink sandstone, green valleys, the air, the light, colors pure and vivid. Guera plain feeling warm, red, comfortable.
Those descriptions really bring the setting alive. What about observations of the people?
So many small, telling details. Bedouins relaxing onto stony ground like lizards and corpse-like abandon. Old Tafas describing Sharif Ali's fighters as children of battle. Sharif Sharaf's contradictory face, sinister yet with a pleasant smile. The Arab respect for craft over force, sincerity over everything, individual portraits of bodyguard recruits each distinct. The narrator feeling like an outsider, an unconsidered Arab, even in the joyous Damascus crowd. The armored car crews, weathered into individuals by sun and grime.
And specific sensory details, smells, sounds.
Loads of them. Singing telegraph wires, echoes of camel feet on rotten stone, the rustle of sand moving west, smell of smoke, taste of rain, locusts silvering the air, the crackle of white silk robes, the music of shell fragments in the air, a camel's breath steaming in the cold.
And were there moments of actual joy or relief amidst the hardship?
Yes, the source captures those too. The wild spirits when men got paid. A merry party before a march. Abd el-Karim's easy, salacious humor. Laughter over odd booty like cable or exploders. Joy at getting rifles after fighting with stones. The welcome at Azraq Oasis. The boasting. Eating unexpected treats like sausages and grapes. The thrill of easy victories, fighting deluxe. Allenby's encouraging twinkle. Nasir finding that comfortable cave, joy firing guns in celebration, and that absolute explosion of joy entering Damascus, the tar bushes, torn veils, flowers, carpets, scent. Even finding Turkish doctors calmly making toffee in the captured HQ.
So this deep dive reveals this incredibly complex picture. A war driven by abstract ideas clashing with harsh realities, fought by fascinating individuals, endured at immense cost, yet punctuated by beauty and undercut by deception.
That sums it up well. The source constantly circles back to how the revolt began on false pretenses because of Sykes-Picot. This forced the narrator into that rankling fraudulence. Their internal conflict, the body-mind split, the lost honor, feeling alone with the abstract ideal character, these are central threads. Even King Hussein's difficult personality added another layer of challenge.
It really makes you question what victory even meant in this context.
Exactly. The source points out Allenby's success relied on bluff, timing, luck, the Turks being blind. Cooperation was fraught. The narrator felt only one British officer truly understood how to blend regular war with this irregular rebellion.
This has been a genuinely deep dive into a complex time and an intensely personal record of it.
It leaves you with so much to think about.
So let's leave you, our listeners, with this thought to chew on. The sources show us this intricate dance between abstract ideas, freedom, nationhood, faith-driving people, described as inherently unstable, to acts of incredible bravery and endurance.
Right, but those high ideals constantly slammed into the messy realities of tribal politics, personal ambition, and the ugly truths of international power games.
The narrator grappled with all of this, searching for some abstract purity in the war, preferring to wreck machines rather than men, yet trapped in that web of deceit and the unavoidable grime and suffering of conflict.
So consider this. In a war that seemed to be about concrete things like land and political control, the source suggests the real victories and defeats often hinged on intangible factors.
Things like the power of an idea, the weight of a broken promise, a leader's character, or even just how individuals related to the physical world around them.
What does this deep dive suggest about the nature of conflict itself, both then and maybe now? How much are tangible goals shaped or distorted by these intangible forces and hidden agendas?
A question definitely worth mulling over.
Indeed.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive into the raw experiences and tangled politics of the Arab Revolt, seen through the lens of our source material.
We've touched on the shifting Arab identity, the sparks of rebellion, the amazing mix of leaders, and the brutal, sometimes surreal reality of that desert war.
We've seen ideals inspire incredible acts, but also the long shadow cast by broken promises and personal struggles.
Remember that final thought. How much do intangible forces really shape our tangible world, especially in conflict?
We hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insights, maybe spark some new questions.
Definitely food for thought.
Until next time, keep digging deeper.